Hi, everybody. My name is Rhonda Glennon. I'm the Technical Publications Manager at Mapzen. We're a startup that's associated with the Samsung Accelerator. I'm going to talk about how people can use documentation to contribute to open source projects. So as a writer, we have skills like finding typos and writing tutorials, all these things that you can do. To start working with an open source project, the documentation is a really easy way to become a contributor to it. So I'm going to talk about a case study at my company, Mapzen, that uses GitHub to contribute to the documentation. So at Mapzen, if you go to our website at mapzen.com, we have documentation at mapzen.com/documentation. Everything we do is open source and open data. And most users will access our documentation through a link at the top of the screen that says documentation on it. And what that does is it takes them into a formatted help system that we built using open source tools that contains content for all of our products. So let's say I'm a user and I go through this and I see a typo or I want to contribute to it. We've made it so that users can click a link at the bottom of our help system that says edit this page on GitHub. And so GitHub is the repository that contains all of our documentation. It's a website that allows collaborative code organization. So if I want to make this change, what I do, I go in and I can sign into my GitHub account. So I need a GitHub account. And then I click the Edit This File button on GitHub's website. And then that shows me a unformatted version in Markdown. We use Markdown format. And I can go in, and here's an example where I found a typo in my own documentation that said "and code," so I can go in and make that change. So then how do I propose that this change gets added into the master repository that contains all the source files? Well, first thing, when I'm making a contribution to an open source project, I should look at the contribution guidelines. For example, Mapzen has a project called Peleus, that's our open source geographic search engine, so I should follow those guidelines, and then I'm going to make the change in my own branch. And what's cool about GitHub is even though I may not have access to the files, it automatically creates a writable version for me. And then so I can go in, I create a pull request. That's the way that you get content back into the master, and then the community organizers can accept your changes. So that's how you as writers can accept open contributions. So if you're a documentation manager, consider opening up your documentation to users. It will foster community engagement. You can make a connection with their users. You find out what they want to learn based on what changes they're making to your documentation. So at least have the ability for users to put comments on the page if it's right for your workflow. So thanks again. My name's Rhonda Glennon, mapzen.com/documentation. Questions? Anything?
Have you run into any downsides from opening up for open contributions?
So the question is, have we had any downsides? So I spent 12 years working for a large software company that had globalization and those kind of issues. So it may not be right for every workflow, but at our company, we're much smaller. Everything we do is open source and open data, so we want to encourage community contributions into it. So the only thing might be an additional overhead that would the documentation managers would need to review all this, but it's so much worth it considering you're getting direct user feedback. Customers may see a typo in your documentation, and normally they would have to go through technical support to log an issue, and some people say, well, it's just not worth it. So if we provided that little button that says edit in GitHub, then they can do it and they feel empowered, and and then they get that little green box on their GitHub profile that says I'm a contributor. Like for example, if you look at the Swift Apple Swift documentation or the repository that contains it, there's like 100. I found 100 pull requests. That's the way that you on GitHub that you get content back into a master. I found 100 pull requests that were just on documentation. So now these people say, look, I'm a contributor to the Swift project. Look at this. So documentation is a nice way to get into open source. The end. Thanks.